Eleanor had always believed that family was everything, but as she grew older, she realized some family members were more toxic than supportive. The constant demands, judgments, and manipulations left her exhausted and mentally drained. Have you ever felt trapped by your own relatives, unsure how to break free without feeling guilty? You're not alone. In today's video, I'll guide you through the 5 types of people you must avoid, even if they're family, and how to protect your peace. Let's dive in and uncover the truths you need to live freely. 1. The over-demanding relative. It was always Aunt Margaret who seemed to need something, whether it was a ride to an appointment, help with her grocery shopping, or a shoulder to cry on. Eleanor, like many, always felt obligated to say yes. After all, family is supposed to help each other, right? But over the years, she started to realize the toll it was taking on her own mental and physical health. Eleanor's afternoons used to be a time for rest, reflection, and enjoying her hobbies. But after the constant requests from Aunt Margaret, those moments became rare. Eleanor started feeling drained. She wasn't just helping Margaret, she was giving up her time, energy, and peace. And for what? An endless cycle that left her feeling resentful and emotionally worn out. Sound familiar? Many of us experience this dynamic with family. The problem isn't that we want to help, it's that some family members demand more than we can give, expecting us to be on call 24/7. Whether it's their emotional needs or physical demands, these relationships can become an emotional burden, leading to burnout. The key to setting boundaries with these over-demanding relatives is recognizing that saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary for your well-being. Start small. Politely decline when you're feeling overwhelmed, and prioritize your own needs. You don't need to provide an explanation every time. Sometimes a simple, "I'm not able to do that today, but thank you for understanding," is enough. Remember, Eleanor's journey didn't happen overnight. It took time for her to recognize the importance of saying no. And she slowly learned that by giving herself permission to say no, she gave herself the gift of time and energy. 2. The negative naysayer. Eleanor's cousin Lucy had always been a pessimist. At every family gathering, Lucy would find something to criticize, whether it was Eleanor's latest project or a decision she had made for her future. For years, Eleanor tried to brush it off, telling herself that Lucy's negativity didn't matter. But over time, the constant criticism began to chip away at Eleanor's confidence and self-esteem. Has this ever happened to you? It's easy to shrug off a one-time comment or remark, but when negativity is constant, it can affect the way you view yourself. And when it's coming from someone you love, it's even harder to ignore. Eleanor's turning point came when she realized that Lucy's opinions weren't a reflection of her worth. It was Lucy's own fears and insecurities that led her to project negativity onto others. Eleanor took a step back and made the decision to set boundaries with Lucy. No more unsolicited advice, no more criticisms. If you're dealing with a relative who constantly puts you down, take Eleanor's example to heart. You don't have to tolerate negativity in your life. When it happens, calmly express how their comments make you feel. "I hear what you're saying, but I'm really happy with my decision," is a simple way to stand firm without confrontation. By distancing herself from Lucy's toxic energy, Eleanor found a renewed sense of confidence. It's okay to protect yourself from negative influences, even if those influences are family members. You deserve to be surrounded by people who uplift you, not bring you down. 3. The self-centered family member family is supposed to be a support system, right? But what happens when one relative only seems to care about their own needs? For Eleanor, this was her nephew, Jake. Jake had a way of making everything about him, whether it was showing up to visit only when he needed something or dominating conversations with stories of his latest achievements. Eleanor began to feel like she was invisible in her own home. Does this sound all too familiar? It's easy to feel like your needs don't matter when you're constantly being overshadowed by someone who only cares about their own. Eleanor initially felt guilty for wanting a relationship where she wasn't expected to just listen to Jake's triumphs. She felt like she was being selfish for wanting attention and care for herself, but the truth was, she wasn't asking for much, just a little consideration. The key to navigating this situation is recognizing that relationships should be mutual. If you find yourself always giving, always listening, and never receiving, it might be time to reevaluate that relationship. You're allowed to ask for support, to share your feelings, and to expect respect. Take Eleanor's advice. When Jake called, she started setting small boundaries. Instead of listening to another monologue about his latest adventure, she would steer the conversation toward mutual interests. She also made it clear that her time and energy were valuable, and if Jake needed something, it was important to respect her space first. By taking control of the narrative in their interactions, Eleanor found that the relationship with Jake improved. She didn't lose her connection with him. She simply found a healthier balance. You can do the same. It's all about showing yourself the respect you deserve. 4. The manipulative family member. Eleanor's brother, Tom, was always the family fixer. But what started as help with small tasks, like organizing the holiday dinner, gradually turned into him taking control of everything. From dictating the way she should decorate her house to suggesting who should be invited to family gatherings, Tom was subtly manipulating every situation, and Eleanor didn't realize how much it was affecting her until one evening when she found herself resentfully agreeing to another of his plans. This is where many of us find ourselves, isn't it? A well-meaning family member who somehow twists the situation so that it always goes their way, leaving you feeling powerless. You think you're just going along with the flow, but deep down, you know you're being pulled in a direction you never wanted. The worst part is, they make you feel like you're the one at fault for not going along with it. But here's the thing. Manipulation is a subtle art, and often, we don't see it coming. Tom had mastered it, making Eleanor feel guilty whenever she tried to make decisions for herself. The guilt would pile on until Eleanor had to remind herself that her own desires were just as valid. The problem wasn't Eleanor's willingness to help. It was that Tom took advantage of her kindness, using guilt as a tool to get what he wanted. Eleanor's breakthrough came when she realized that manipulating family dynamics for control was unhealthy for both of them. She learned that setting firm boundaries didn't mean rejecting Tom outright. It meant acknowledging that she had her own voice, too. One of the most powerful tools Eleanor used to set boundaries with Tom was the art of saying no without guilt. This wasn't an easy step. At first, she felt like she was betraying him or being selfish, but she gradually realized that boundaries protect relationships, ensuring that love isn't built on manipulation, but on mutual respect. Try starting with small, low-stakes situations. If a manipulative relative tries to make decisions for you, simply and kindly redirect the conversation. For example, "I appreciate your suggestion, but I'm happy with my plan. Thanks for understanding." And most importantly, don't feel obligated to explain yourself any further. Your choices are yours to make, and that's something worth embracing. 5. The overly protective family member. It wasn't always easy for Eleanor to make decisions for herself, especially when it came to her safety. After losing her husband, she found herself under the constant supervision of her daughter, Claire, who believed that protecting her mother meant controlling every aspect of her life. From suggesting Eleanor shouldn't drive anymore to insisting she only go out when Claire was available to accompany her, Eleanor's independence began to feel suffocating. This is a challenge many seniors face. Family members, especially those who want to protect us, often overstep boundaries. Their intentions might be good, but their actions can undermine our independence. It's a tricky line to walk. How do you appreciate someone wanting to keep you safe without feeling like you're being treated like a child? At first, Eleanor just went along with Claire's suggestions, not wanting to hurt her feelings. But over time, it wore on her. She felt her confidence slipping, and that sense of independence she once cherished began to fade. Eleanor knew something had to change. The first step to handling the situation was acknowledging that Claire's concern came from love. Eleanor wasn't angry with her daughter. She understood where it was coming from. But Eleanor also recognized that she needed her own space. She wasn't incapable, just independent. One evening, after yet another insistence that Eleanor shouldn't drive alone, Eleanor sat down with Claire for an open, honest conversation. "I know you care about me, and I appreciate it, but I need you to trust me. I'm capable of making my own decisions, and I value my independence." It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was one that helped restore their relationship to a healthier, more respectful dynamic. If you find yourself in a similar situation, start by recognizing that your autonomy is important. While it's essential to listen to the advice of loved ones, you're still in charge of your own decisions. Express gratitude for their concern, but let them know when you need space. Little by little, you'll regain the freedom to live life on your terms. Remember, it's okay to lean on family, but it's also okay to take the lead on your own journey. 6. The criticizing relative. There was always someone in Eleanor's family who seemed to know better, whether it was her cousin, Louise, telling her how to decorate her home, or her sister, Helen, offering unsolicited advice on how she should spend her retirement. Eleanor loved her family, but after a while, the constant advice and judgments began to feel like an attack. She began questioning herself, doubting her own decisions. Have you ever felt this way? You know, that nagging feeling that every decision you make is being scrutinized by someone who just can't seem to offer support without criticism? It's draining, isn't it? What starts as well-intended advice can quickly turn into a series of judgments that leave you feeling disrespected and overlooked. Eleanor's experience with Louise and Helen was exhausting, but it wasn't until she had a heart-to-heart with a trusted friend that she saw things clearly. She realized that criticism from loved ones didn't define her. Their opinions, while well-meaning, didn't have the power to diminish her own happiness or choices. Eleanor began to develop a new approach to handling criticism. She learned to tune out unhelpful comments and focus on her own inner voice. When a family member offered unsolicited advice, she politely acknowledged it without feeling the need to defend herself. "I appreciate your concern, but I've made my decision. Thank you for understanding," became her go-to response. By practicing this new approach, Eleanor freed herself from the constant weight of criticism. She found confidence in trusting her own decisions and surrounded herself with people who genuinely supported her growth. You can do the same. Remember that your voice matters, and no one should make you feel small for the choices you make. Stand firm and let go of the need for approval. 7. The financially dependent relative Eleanor's nephew, Kevin, had always struggled to manage his finances. As a young man, he'd made some poor decisions, and as he got older, the pattern continued. At first, Eleanor had tried to help, offering financial advice and even small loans. She'd hoped that with time, Kevin would take responsibility for his situation. However, as the years passed, he increasingly relied on her for money, even asking for larger sums without offering any plan for paying it back. It's a delicate situation when family members lean on you for financial support, especially when it feels like they've become dependent. You want to help them, to give them a leg up, but it's easy to become overwhelmed by the burden of carrying their financial weight. Eleanor found herself torn. She didn't want to turn her back on Kevin, but she realized that by continuously offering him money without any change in his behavior, she wasn't helping him. She was enabling him. The breakthrough moment came one evening when Kevin asked for another loan, and Eleanor felt a deep sense of frustration. She decided it was time for a change. The first step was setting clear boundaries. Eleanor began by saying, "Kevin, I care about you, but I can no longer keep lending you money without seeing progress. It's important for you to learn how to manage your finances, and I can't be your safety net anymore." It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary for both her and Kevin's growth. If you're in a similar situation, remember that it's okay to say no. Helping family is an act of love, but enabling negative patterns is not. Encourage independence by helping family members find resources or financial counseling, but resist the urge to give money without a clear plan. Setting these boundaries may feel uncomfortable at first, but over time, you'll see that both you and your loved ones grow stronger for it. 8. The emotionally draining family member. Eleanor had always been the calm, steady presence in her family, the one who offered advice and a listening ear when someone needed it. But her cousin, Alice, always seemed to turn to her during times of emotional turmoil, and the conversations often left Eleanor feeling drained. Alice's constant need for reassurance and emotional support was exhausting, leaving Eleanor emotionally overwhelmed. It's common for those who are deeply empathetic to attract emotionally draining people who constantly need validation, reassurance, or advice. At first, you don't mind offering support, but over time, the emotional toll becomes too much. It can leave you feeling depleted, even if you love the person deeply. Eleanor, however, had learned to spot the signs of emotional exhaustion and knew that she needed to take control of her own well-being. The turning point came when Alice began calling Eleanor every evening to talk about her latest worries, and it was starting to feel like an obligation. Eleanor realized that she needed to set boundaries, not just for her sake, but for Alice's too. The solution wasn't to cut Alice off or refuse her support, but rather to have an honest conversation about the need for balance. "Alice, I love you, and I want to be here for you, but I'm feeling overwhelmed by our conversations. I need some space to recharge, and I can't give you the support you need if I'm running on empty." Sometimes, the best way to help someone is by showing them how to find support elsewhere. For Eleanor, it meant encouraging Alice to seek out professional help, whether through counseling or support groups. Eleanor could still be there for Alice in a more balanced way, but she had to learn to protect her own emotional energy. If you're in a similar position, take a step back and assess how your relationships are affecting you. Emotional energy is finite, and it's crucial to prioritize your own well-being. Offer your support, but don't allow it to consume you. Healthy relationships are built on boundaries, not on draining emotional demands. 9. The inconsistent family member. Eleanor's niece, Sarah, had always been unpredictable. Sometimes she would reach out to catch up, inviting Eleanor to lunch or sending a thoughtful card. But other times, Sarah would disappear for months, leaving Eleanor wondering if something had happened or if she was just forgotten. Eleanor understood that Sarah had a busy life, but the inconsistency in their relationship was starting to weigh on her. Inconsistent family members can be especially hurtful because they leave you feeling unimportant. You never know where you stand, and the emotional uncertainty can leave you questioning your worth in their eyes. It's not easy to handle, but the key to managing these types of relationships is in understanding your own feelings and establishing clear expectations. For Eleanor, It was important to accept that Sarah's actions weren't a reflection of her own worth. She had spent far too many evenings wondering what she'd done wrong or why Sarah had pulled away. But Eleanor realized that Sarah's inconsistency wasn't something she could control. It was a pattern in Sarah's life that had nothing to do with her. So Eleanor took a step back. Instead of constantly waiting for Sarah's next move, she shifted her focus to herself. She began creating her own activities and plans without waiting for Sarah to reach out. When Sarah did call or show up, Eleanor was pleasantly surprised, but she no longer relied on those moments to define her happiness. The lesson here is that you can't change someone else's behavior, but you can control your own reactions. If you find yourself in a similar situation with a loved one, it's okay to lower your expectations and focus on finding fulfillment outside of that relationship. This way, you protect your emotional well-being while still leaving space for meaningful connections when they do arise. 10. The guilt-tripping relative. Marjorie had always been the family peacemaker. She would never dream of letting anyone down, especially when it came to family. But over the years, her daughter, Lisa, had become a master at using guilt to get what she wanted. "You never come to visit me anymore, Mom," Lisa would say, even though Marjorie had been busy taking care of her own health. Or, "I could really use your help with the kids this weekend," a request that seemed to come every time Marjorie was planning something for herself. At first, Marjorie would feel torn. She loved her daughter and wanted to help, but the guilt trips began to feel manipulative. She found herself saying yes when she really wanted to say no, feeling increasingly drained and resentful. What started as a way to keep the peace had evolved into a pattern that was now taking a toll on her mental and physical well-being. It was time for Marjorie to regain control. She realized that her willingness to do anything for Lisa had been clouded by a sense of obligation rather than a genuine desire to help. The breakthrough moment came when Marjorie finally acknowledged that it wasn't selfish to prioritize herself. Her first step was recognizing the pattern of guilt tripping and giving herself permission to say no. "Lisa, I love you, but I can't always drop everything for you. I need to take care of myself too," she said one afternoon. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that it's okay to set limits. Guilt can be a powerful force, but it's essential to recognize when it's being used against you. Saying no doesn't make you a bad person. It means you're taking care of your own well-being, which in turn allows you to show up more fully for the people you love. 11. The Constant Critic. Beatrice's sister, Dorothy, had always been a bit of a perfectionist. From a young age, Dorothy had set high expectations for herself and others, and it seemed like nothing could ever live up to her standards. While Beatrice had learned to shrug off some of her sister's criticisms over the years, it began to feel more difficult as they both aged. Whether it was about Beatrice's house, her choice of clothes, or the way she cooked, Dorothy always had something to say. For Beatrice, it was exhausting. She had spent a lifetime trying to please Dorothy, but it was never enough. The constant criticism was starting to erode Beatrice's confidence, and she found herself second-guessing everything. The turning point came when Beatrice realized that she was allowing Dorothy's opinions to take up too much emotional space in her life. Beatrice knew she didn't need her sister's approval to feel good about herself, but letting go of the desire for it was easier said than done. Beatrice had to take a step back and reevaluate the dynamic. She needed to recognize that Dorothy's criticisms weren't about her. They were about Dorothy's own insecurities. Instead of internalizing the comments, Beatrice started setting boundaries. "Dorothy, I know you mean well, but I don't need advice on everything. I'm comfortable with the choices I'm making." It was a difficult conversation, but it brought about a necessary shift. Beatrice began to take pride in her own decisions, no longer allowing Dorothy's critical remarks to hold so much weight. If you're in a similar situation, it's important to remember that constant criticism often says more about the person giving it than about you. It can be helpful to gently but firmly set boundaries with those who constantly criticize, reminding them that you're confident in your choices and don't need to justify them. Protecting your self-esteem is a vital part of maintaining healthy relationships. 12. The self-centered family member. As much as Pauline loved her younger brother, Henry, she couldn't ignore the fact that he had a habit of making everything about him. Over the years, he'd become more and more absorbed in his own world, leaving Pauline feeling like an afterthought. If Henry was going through something difficult, he expected her full attention. Yet when Pauline faced her own struggles, Henry was nowhere to be found. This self-centered behavior left Pauline feeling isolated and unsupported. She'd always been there for Henry when he needed her, but over time, it became clear that the relationship was one-sided. Pauline knew it wasn't healthy to keep giving her emotional energy to someone who wasn't willing to reciprocate. The breakthrough moment came when Pauline realized that she didn't need to keep putting Henry's needs ahead of her own. She loved him, but she couldn't continue to be the one who always made sacrifices. Pauline started making a conscious effort to focus on herself and her own needs. She set clearer boundaries, telling Henry, "I'm here for you, but I also need time and energy for myself. I can't always be your emotional support." This shift wasn't easy, and Pauline had to deal with guilt at first, but the result was that she began to take back control of her life. She started engaging in activities that brought her joy and fulfilled her own emotional needs, instead of constantly sacrificing for someone who wasn't there for her. If you're dealing with a self-centered family member, it's important to recognize your own worth and prioritize your well-being. Love doesn't mean self-sacrifice. It means creating space for both people to thrive. Don't be afraid to put yourself first, and remember that healthy relationships are built on mutual care and respect. 13. The overly protective relative. Margaret was always the life of the party, quick to make others laugh, but as she aged, she found herself more sensitive to her surroundings. Her daughter, Rachel, who lived far away, would call her multiple times a day, asking if she needed anything. "Mom, did you remember to take your medication today? Mom, have you eaten enough? You need to make sure you're staying hydrated." At first, Margaret appreciated the attention, but over time, it started to feel suffocating. Rachel meant well, but Margaret's daughter was treating her like an invalid, as though she wasn't capable of making her own decisions. Margaret prided herself on being independent, and having someone constantly hover over her felt like a loss of dignity. Margaret began to feel resentful, even though she loved Rachel dearly. The shift came when Margaret, instead of responding with defensiveness, simply said, "Rachel, I appreciate your concern, but I need to be the one to manage my day-to-day. I will call you if I need help." This open and honest conversation set a new tone for their relationship. Rachel started to respect Margaret's autonomy, realizing that her overprotectiveness was born from a place of fear, not necessity. Margaret regained the space she needed to thrive in her independence, while still knowing that her daughter was there for support when she truly needed it. If you find yourself in a similar situation with a family member who's too protective, it's important to set boundaries that preserve your dignity and autonomy. Reassure your loved ones that you're capable but will reach out when necessary. It's not about pushing them away. It's about creating a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. 14. The passive-aggressive relative Eva had always been the quiet one in the family, never one to raise her voice or make a scene. But over the years, her cousin, Linda, had become adept at using passive-aggressive comments to express dissatisfaction. It would start with remarks like, "I suppose some people have time for themselves, while others are just busy all the time," when Eva made plans to take a break. Or, "I wish I could find the time to relax, but I'm always too busy helping others." At first, Eva didn't catch on, but as Linda's comments grew more frequent, Eva began to feel guilty for simply taking care of herself. She had her own life, responsibilities, and desires, but Linda's subtle comments made her second-guess everything. Eva found herself trying to explain why she needed to focus on her own health or why she was taking time to herself. The realization came when Eva recognized Linda's passive-aggressive behavior wasn't about her at all. It was Linda's way of expressing unspoken feelings of envy or inadequacy. Instead of trying to please Linda or justify her decisions, Eva chose to address the comments directly. She said, "Linda, if you're feeling upset or left out, let's talk about it. But I'm not going to let passive-aggressive remarks make me feel guilty for taking care of myself." By speaking up, Eva empowered herself to stop absorbing Linda's negativity and reclaim her peace. If you deal with a passive-aggressive family member, it's important to confront the behavior calmly but firmly. You don't need to apologize for living your life or making choices that benefit your well-being. Address the behavior head-on and set the tone for healthier, more honest communication. 15. The entitled relative Jill had always been the one to give, always there to lend a hand, a listening ear, or financial support when a family member needed it. But over the years, she noticed that some of her relatives had begun to expect things from her without offering anything in return. It was as though they assumed Jill would always be available, ready to step in whenever they faced a difficulty. One afternoon, Jill's nephew called, asking for a loan to cover an emergency. "I'll pay you back next month," he promised. Jill hesitated. She had helped him before, and he had never followed through with repayment. It wasn't the money that bothered her, but the growing sense of entitlement that came with these requests. Jill began to realize that her family had begun to take her generosity for granted. Jill had to set a clear boundary. The next time her nephew asked for help, she gently but firmly said, "I love you, but I can't keep giving without any accountability on your part. If you need help, let's talk about a plan for repayment, but I can't just hand out money without a clear agreement." This new approach helped Jill break free from the cycle of feeling used, while still showing her love and support for her family. She also learned that kindness doesn't mean sacrificing her own needs or becoming a doormat. If you're dealing with an entitled relative, it's essential to recognize that setting boundaries is not only for your protection, but also for the health of your relationships. Saying no when necessary doesn't make you a bad person. It's a healthy act of self-care. Stay firm and don't let guilt take away your sense of agency. You deserve to prioritize your well-being too. You've made it through. Kudos to you for recognizing the importance of protecting your peace. Setting boundaries with family is no easy feat, but trust me, it's worth it. Now go ahead and share your thoughts. How do you deal with tricky family dynamics? Let's chat in the comments.